Hey everybody, Andrew Main here. Normally when I do a Periscope session, when the app first launched, I think you could only do it in like the vertical format, which maybe I'm wrong on that, and I've decided to do it in the horizontal format because I might be able to upload this up to YouTube too. Of course, the problem is I'm such a narcissist that I just want to stare at my own face here instead of look at the camera. So I'm going to try to make an effort to look at the camera. I wanted to come in here and talk about some creativity tricks, ways in which you can increase the output, how to get yourself through hard spots when you're trying to create and you want to start producing more, and what are some of the ways in which you could do that. And, one of my favorite things I do all the time is I have notebooks, tons and tons and tons of these notebooks that I keep around me all the time for ideas, and it could be something stupid like sketches, I don't even know what they are, or it can be notes. It could be a lot of different things that come to mind. And so I make sure that I always have something handy in which I can write down ideas. And it could be a notebook, it can be anything on your phone. I use the Notes app on my phone all the time. Notes is a great way on Android, everything else like that. There are a lot of different ways in which you can keep track of that, but one of the things you want to do is get in the habit of, if you're an athlete and you're training, you always try to find how you can fit more training in. If you're somebody who wants to run, you're always looking for more opportunities to get in extra stretching, running, etc., whatever, different kind of workouts. If you're a weightlifter, you're trying to eat and lift. If you're a writer or a creative, you want to work on the same thing, is you want to figure out all the opportunities you can stretch those creative muscles, so when you need them, it's easy to get those things going. And creativity means a lot of things. And if you're a writer, it means you've got to tell a story, you've got to create characters, and so often we get tripped up and we stop when we're stumped because we're writing a scene and our character goes into a restaurant and they've got to talk to somebody and we don't know who that is, we don't know what the restaurant is. There are a lot of these questions there that we don't have answers to. So the more used you are to just coming up with answers on the fly or keeping track of things, the better. So tools I like to use are, again, my note app. I'm always making notes. And another trick that you can use as a creative is your camera app, okay? The beautiful thing about the camera app, hello there, how you doing? It's me talking to you through my camera here. You can take photos at any place you go to just to use as notes to jog your memory or to jog ideas. Periodically, I will be, I was on the lot at 20th Century, I was on the lot at Paramount Pictures this week, right? So I was on the lot there and I walked by kind of like one of their backstreet areas which like the last time I think I was there was, years ago when they were shooting a Houdini movie. And I took a couple photos of the lot, not to put on social media or to tweet out, because I'm like, you know what? Periodically, I write stories that might involve movie studios, and I've been on a number of lots, but you kind of forget details. And I thought, one of the cool things about when you're on a lot is they have like the bungalows, the offices where people work, and sometimes they have funny street names. And so I'll take photos of places like that. I took a photo actually of the map of the lot, just so later on, if I wanted to use that as a detail. I take photos of street corners, of restaurants, all the time. I'll be, just take some random photographs just because I want to be able to pull up those details later on instead of having to stretch my imagination when it's maybe already been considerably stretched. So use your camera on your phone to take photos of stuff. If you're in a line, take photographs of people, and you learn how to describe people who may look on the surface. If you say, oh, they're 5'6" and they have dark brown hair, that's half the planet. What you need to be able to do is to figure out how to describe things a little bit differently. So one of the little tools I use is that. Recording conversations with permission is also helpful. It gives you an idea of how dialogue flows. Of course, when you write a story or a book, you're presenting kind of an idealized version of reality. It's reality without the boring parts is what I like to describe. And that's one of the challenges I found in both filmmaking and writing is we're often, confused. Like, what am I supposed to do? Is this like a documentary where I just let the camera go, or I write everything that happens? Or am I making decisions to edit? Well, the answer is you're always making decisions to edit. A great storyteller is somebody who tells you the interesting parts and leaves out the boring parts, unless the boring parts build up to something that's a little more interesting. One of my other favorite, things to do besides keeping track is the way I make my notes. I start with questions. I ask a lot of questions, and I'll start off on a piece of paper. If I want to tell a story, I go, what is this about? What is this about? And if I'm trying to work on, let's say, a book, like even a nonfiction book, I'll say, what's the premise? And after I'm done with the book, how do I present this idea to someone? And they say, what's this about? What's involved? Etc. You want to have a very clear idea of what you're doing at each point when you can, because that gives you something to shoot for. It gives you a goal. It gives you a place that you want to end up at. We often get very lost creatively because we forget the intent. We get so focused on the details, we forgot the purpose of that. If you guys have any questions, by the way, please feel free. You can jump right in and ask them. If I don't answer your question because I'm answering something else, just go back and ask me again, and I will do my best to give you some input on that. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Andrew Main. I'm a magician, writer. I've done TV, show on A&E. I've done some other networks too. I write books. My newest novel coming out in March is Blackfall. It's the third Jessica Blackwood story. She's an FBI agent from a family of magicians who solves crimes that look supernatural, but they're not. This is the third book in the series. The second book was nominated for the Thriller Award. This book just got a review from Publishers Weekly. They called it an enthralling, clever, twisty treat. It sounds like, something you'd get at a frozen yogurt shop. But anyhow, very thrilled with the review and very, very happy the reaction it's getting so far. So I write fiction, I write nonfiction, I produce TV, and don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but I like to be creative and find different outlets for doing that. And periodically, it helps me to hop into here and just talk about creativity. This is one of the ways in which I kind of think things through. I'm very fortunate that I've got some good friends that I can call up and I can bounce ideas off of. And that's another important thing, is to figure out who your creativity group is. Who are the people you're going to go to talk to? Sometimes, we think we have the right group of people to go to, and maybe it's not, because some people try to push their own ideas onto you. Some people maybe don't have enough background to give you sort of the answers you need. And you either have to extend your circle or get your circle to start expanding what they're capable of outwards. That's one of the cool things about, creating kind of a readers club, or some sort of group of people that are continuously trying to improve their knowledge base. If you're going to the same people over and over again and they're giving you the same answers, then it's hard to improve. C writes, have you ever read a book and thought, there are 3 days in action, when do they go to the bathroom? That's, one of the funny things, like if you watch, the Star Trek movies, is we have no idea if there are toilets on the Enterprise. They've got teleporters and everything else. I write a lot of stuff that feels sort of real time, and you sort of wonder, do they sleep? Do they catch their breath? And as long as, you assume that not every single second is accounted for, we tend to make a lot of allowances for that. And that gets into one of those things you start to focus on and go, how much detail do you put into that? I know with filmmaking, that was one of the things that was troublesome for me in the very beginning, was trying to understand how film compresses time, because you think like, okay, I'm going to show somebody going up to a house and then going indoors. Hello, Caitlin. How do I handle this? And you think like, do I show them shutting off the car, getting out of the car, closing the car door, putting their keys in their pocket, walking up the steps, if it's their house, pulling out their keys, unlocking the door, going through the door, and then inside, and then saying hello? That's 7 minutes. That could be a long time. But it's a long time if you try to show all of that. In film is one of those things, and writing is like this too, but film is told through kind of the cut. Film is told through basically one image to the next image, and you theoretically have an idea of how much time has elapsed, and it moves forward. Sometimes in a poorly edited film, or a film where the filmmaker didn't get as much footage or shoot it the right way, you can be very confused. Like, wait, did 2 minutes? Is that instantaneous, or was that what we call a jump cut? In writing, the same thing can happen. I have situations where in my books, I'll give you. Oh, this is great. I think I just turned right to an example of that. I think. Oh, there we go. I have like within one chapter, I needed to kind of jump ahead a little bit, but I didn't want to go to a new chapter, so I used that little convenient little space there. Some time or some moment has elapsed there, all right? You know that something has changed. SIS, which I don't know how to pronounce your name, points out like, yeah, in movies you never, everybody when they have a taxi, they always just go like, keep the change or whatever, because it's the easiest way to get somebody out of a taxi in a hurry. But, you know, it's kind of a cliche, like, here, keep the change, or if they don't pay, then it looks sort of silly. You just assume they paid in advance. But in a book here, so you have that little space there, so that's one of the ways you can sort of jump ahead. Somebody just asked, will this book be out on Audible? It will. It's actually going to come out on Audible the same day that it's released as a book, which I believe is March 21st, around that same period. So it's available for pre-order on Audible, so if you want to go ahead and, you know, use a credit for that, it'd be kind of cool. I'd be like, you know, it'd be great. It's cool. Just, you know, support me, support everybody involved with that. So it will be on Audible too. But yeah, that's one of those many little things that we have, these little questions. And I know that, man, when I get stuck, often the problem is I don't know where to go next, and I don't know why I'm stumped. Do I read this myself, or somebody else does it? Angel Killer, Blackfall, and Name of the Devil, these books, they're all told from the first-person point of view of Jessica Blackwood, who happens to be a woman, and I cannot do a woman's voice, so we have a wonderful narrator who does that voice. So no, that's not me doing that. It says TV tells you can't trust it. Well, do you trust TV? Think about that. Think about that. I try to figure out, one, how to just put a lot of ideas down on paper. I try to figure out, once I try to figure out how to put a bunch of ideas on paper, I then try to figure out how to organize those, how to structure those things, and how to put those into, you know, build structure from there. It can start from a bunch of random ideas. You think of like your Pinterest boards, people who do that. They take a bunch of photos, they find things online, they put them together, and they're trying to sort of tell a story. I do that when I write. I do that when I create, or if it's something like an idea for a software project or something, or if it's an idea for a movie or whatever. A business is, you say, there's a lot of things that I want it to be involved with, things that I think I need to do, things that I want to be involved with, things that should be incorporated into it, and you start from there, and then you see if there's a pattern that emerges or some way in which you can put that into order. For me, with books, it would start off with things like, what are stories I want to tell? What are things I'd like to have happen to a character? And how do I fit them into this narrative? And sometimes you have ideas that you think are great, but they don't quite fit. Sometimes you're stuck on something, and what it needs is something that you had from some other idea. I've had a couple books that ended up condensing things that, you know, came from other places. Jimmy Jacks, this is the best creative Periscope ever. Well, thank you. I appreciate you watching there. Very, very grateful for that. You know, I'm just trying to figure things out like you all are. So anyhow, if you start from, basically, it's okay to start not with a complete idea that it's delivered to your head like, you know, Zeus and Athena. What you can do is you can start with, I like this, I'm going to take these elements, I'm going to start building out from there and expand there. And it might be a premise. You know, I had a book, Public Enemy Zero, which was about a rage virus. What would happen if you got infected with something that made people attack you? Everybody acted like zombies around you, but once you were away from them, they were normal. And I started with that premise because I said, man, I can't just go around killing people because they're normal. It's just a sickness. And so if you have to treat, you know, zombieism or whatever like a sickness where it's not okay to kill, then you have to treat the situation very, very differently. And from there, I thought of like what would be the right character for that story. I'm like, well, it's going to be a person who's the most non-violent person you could imagine. So they're in this move towards violence, but they're going to have to resist that. And asking these kinds of questions can lead you to very interesting places. So freeform, make a list of ideas, brainstorm, start there, look for connections, and start to build outwards. I use a couple different techniques when I create books. When I started, and I was trying to really wrap my head around plotting and structure, is I would use a lot of note cards. I would use note cards. So I would use a note card for each chapter, and I would lay out that structure of like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this is Act 1, this is Act 2, this is Act 3. And the way I would make a note card work is every chapter, you know, a book, a story is a conflict. Every chapter was a conflict. This is the conflict at the head of the chapter. This is the resolution at the end. And this sets us up for the next chapter. And I would lay that out, note cards, and then I could look like, do I have enough here? Do I need to put more in here? And that helped me understand how to expand out. My last couple books, I haven't done note cards. I haven't really needed to do that because I can do that all in one of my journals, but it's not a bad idea. It's really not a bad idea to go back to and do that. Somebody asked the question, how much time do I spend writing a day? It varies. So I was on a book deadline the last 2 weeks, and so I was writing 10,000 words a day. Some days I'll do 20,000 words. A lot of days I don't do any words. It depends. It depends on what my goals are. I've trained myself to be able to write a lot, or to dial it back down, or to pick it back up, depending upon what I need to do. I was running into a problem where I was writing way more books, writing way more material than I had opportunities to release it, and figured I'd try to find that balance, to be able to write a lot and then review a lot and learn more about my craft and improve it. So it depends upon your schedule. If you can find the time to spend an hour a day writing and you can get 1,000 words a day, that's great. Well, it's only 500 words. What matters most is consistency. And I try to make sure that over a period of time, I write enough, I write a lot. And I'll say there are days where I don't write, but I'll actually write. I might be creating a magic trick or some other effect, or maybe writing a post for a blog or a nonfiction book, or just putting ideas together or accruing stuff. It's different for everybody. So don't fall into the habit of trying to compare yourself to other people if there's still a lot of work you need to do just as far as being productive. If you're consistently sitting down and writing and putting forth effort, then that's all it takes. Is that things like books and a lot of big projects, it's not trying to do it in a burst. It's not trying to do it all at once. It's trying to be able to do it over a long period of time. You want to build up through consistency. So, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Somebody mentioned they're going to go shoot their thesis, which sounds exciting and terrifying all at the same time. That's one of those things where, that's when the stress kicks in, because you've got timelines and you've got to turn the stuff in and make things happen in a short period of time, and you're going to probably be relying upon a lot of other people who it's not quite as important to. But I'm sure you're going to get it done, so good luck on that. Let us know how that turns out. When we get into something creatively, or we want to do anything, business or whatever, we look at biographies, we look at people around us, and we set these people up as our heroes, and we try to sort of match ourselves up to them like some sort of horoscope, which is BS and doesn't work. We try to look at those people as templates for who we are, but there's not going to be one. There's not going to be a template. There's only one Steve Jobs. There was no Steve Jobs before Steve Jobs. There was no Steve Jobs after Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was inspired by a number of people, but everybody from the founder of Eastman Kodak to I have my own stupid voice, to Bob Dylan. This is a guy that could be inspired by a number of things that combined together, okay? Him and Steve Wozniak had very different inspirations. Steve Wozniak, as an engineer, was very much, inspired by stories of engineers, people like Marconi and stuff, and people like that. And I think that you take a guy like Elon Musk. Elon Musk is inspired by a diverse group of people, and some people he wouldn't normally think of on the surface, but that you realize that's who influenced them. As far as you go, it's the same thing. And when it comes to, like in writing, I would read, and I'd read a lot about the writing patterns of other authors. What did Stephen King do? What did Michael Crichton do? What was their pattern? How did they do that? And I realized too that one of the things is that, when it comes to writing or writers, is that when you're listening to those people talk, they're at the pinnacle of their career, and what they have to say about their methods at that point isn't as instructive to us perhaps as their methods early on in their career. Stephen King would talk about how, he would spend like a couple hours a day, maybe his feet up on the couch, listen to rock music and write. But when Stephen King was starting out, this was a guy that was trying to make a little writing space inside of a laundry room, trying to just fight for time to do that between, being a father and a husband and working really horrible jobs. He adapted into a very ideal writing style, but he had to start from a very chaotic style and have to deal with everything, anything and everything that could possibly distract him, yet still get his work done. I think that there's, people like Elmore Leonard and others earlier on in their lives, they were trying to do a billion things at once, but yet found the time to write. And so when it comes to what's the best way to do it, it's getting it done. I know it's a pat answer. It's if you ask a photographer, what's the best camera? It's whatever camera you have at hand. When's the best time to write? Whenever you can write. what's the best number of words to do per day? Whatever you can do, whatever you can get done. If I'm on a deadline, like I said, I just did a deadline where I was doing, 10,000 words a day. Ideally, I'd probably try to shoot for like 3,000 or 5,000 words a day, but, I didn't get that situation. And, but if you can adapt to those situations, you're going to find out that you're extremely versatile. People who have problem deadlines are people who have to wait for every single thing to get right. I knew with that deadline, my biggest fear was I was going to get, the flu, in the middle. I was going to get sick in the middle of it. And sure enough, I did. In the middle of writing, my deadline, I got sick, but because I had enough pace, I was able to get that done. Somebody said they tried to message me. Best way to get hold of me is to just use me on email. I'm very easy to get hold of on email. It's andrew@andrewmain.com. I don't do Facebook messages. All these different messages stuff, and DM messages are like, tons of advertisements for Ray-Ban sunglasses. So email's easiest, and I take forever, and sometimes I forget to get back. So do not take it personally. My family goes through this too. So I just try to find the right way to do it. You tried to message me on Periscope. I don't even know how to read a Periscope message. Murray says, don't be too precious with your writing space. It's absolutely, I talk about this a lot. My favorite, thing to do if I get it right, is I'm going to put my little noise-canceling headphones in, throw my hoodie over my head, and just, drill down into it, You can email me as many times as you want. If I'm open and checking email, I can get to it, I will. So again, I'm just telling you right now, don't take it personally. It takes me forever. And really long questions are really hard for me to answer. I have a short attention span. Murray says, when I abandoned that requirement to write, I've been writing every day. Murray, good for you, man. I mean, that's the key, is that, some of the worst writing advice I've ever seen given by some professionals and people like that is like, how to have your ideal writing environment, how to do this, how to do that. I'm like, you got to be like, SEAL Team 6, like how to kill somebody. Well, they go right into this little kill zone box, you're like there, whatever, you manage it. No, you have to be able to ready any time to go do it. How do you deal with being equally interested in many different things outside of writing? Poorly. I deal with it poorly. The way I try to manage that, though, is you have to focus. You have to absolutely focus and decide that one thing is more important than anything else. And you want to know how you know that one thing is more important than anything else? This is the secret. Are you ready for this? Ready? This is like, everybody close to your computer and your phone. This is how you know one thing is more important than anything else. You decide to make that the case. You tell yourself, this is the most important thing. You say, this is going to be the most important thing I have to do. This project, because I have declared it so. Like a papal decree, you have declared this is the critical project. This is the thing you have to get done, because if you don't, then you are an indecisive person that can't finish other projects. I know it sounds stupid and kind of trite, but that's the reality, is you just have to sort of arbitrarily say, this is the one I'm going to do, because if you don't finish projects, you are a person who does not finish projects. You want to become a finisher. You want to be somebody who completes things, and it's better to complete some mediocre stuff than it is to, give up on a lot of great stuff. It doesn't matter how many great projects you give up on, you're not finishing them. And the more projects you finish, the better chances are that you're going to be finishing some great projects. So just pick one and finish it. Pick one that you think you have the most work done, the most developed on it, and just jump into it. The right book to write's the one you're writing right now. That's what you need to do, is just do that. Nobody knows anything. And I encounter this all the time in TV and film and publishing. You can have a theory, you can have an idea about what the ideal thing is or what would be best, but if it starts off with, if you put a good amount of thought going into a project, probably in the middle, nothing's really changed. If you're looking for an excuse to get out. Any word count. The question is, any word count for what? I'm curious to know the rest of that question. I may have missed it earlier, so just tell me and I will give you my suggestions on that. Anybody care to guess where I ate today? Anybody? No, I know. I run into this all the time. I talk to my friends and they get worried when I start talking about other ideas. I'm like, I had this other idea, this other idea. Oh, I'm only allowed 120 pages. How do you decide what goes in your first published book? The answer to that question is like, one is like, I use word count. So 120 pages is a very arbitrary number of very arbitrary length. I would be curious to know what they mean by word count in a book for what? And then ask me that question again, because I probably have a scattershot memory as far as the start of that. But in publishing, you talk about word count, not page count. For scripts, you can talk about, like if we're talking about a script, then it could be a page count because there's sort of a standard sort of format for how many words per page or how many minutes per page. You know, average screenplays, 120 pages, which means it's about a minute per page, roughly speaking. So that's a start there. A page count book for marketing purposes. I don't know if I understand the context of everything else the question is. Yeah, 120 pages, like that's, 120 pages could be, 30,000, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm getting only partial questions. Sorry, I meant to write any amount of words for books. So if you can put the fuller question in there, I'll give you a better answer. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out what the whole question is. In publishing, there are different kinds of lengths that are expected. Like an average like published nonfiction book might be like 60,000 words, or it could be a couple 100,000 words. Average novel is 90,000 words or so, between like 80 or 100 or so. Like a first-time novel, they love like an 80,000 word novel. I think like my last contract I had said like approximately 85,000 words. So that's certainly in the world of fiction. When it comes to nonfiction and things, and it depends if it's going to be a print book or an ebook. I think most nonfiction books are too long. I think that most nonfiction books are actually, they're designed to justify the higher cost, because in publishing the problem is publishers can't make much money if they're only selling like $2 or $3 books, in a bookstore. They're not going to make any money because that's the cost of not just printing but shipping and warehousing it alone. So they need to increase the price of those books. But how do you justify getting somebody to pay $20 for a book? You've got to make it a thick book. So that's what you tell your author, like, oh, it needs to be this big, because if it's smaller, then people are going to feel cheated. People are going to feel cheated because they have to charge more. It's changing online. It's not changing as much, but I've been trying to do that with my books. Pardon me one second. I'll go grab a couple of them to show you. Pardon me. I'm shooting an instructional video, so I have like everything is like lighting and stuff there. So when I write books like The Cure for Writer's Block or How to Write a Novella in 24 Hours, these books are probably like 20,000 words, 20 or 30,000 words. I intentionally try to write these books so you can sit down in one sitting and get the information and move on. I don't want to write... I could certainly expand these books into much fuller, thicker novels, but I think that would be a problem. Oh, Dispori, great question. Is there a place for novellas? I think that there is a wonderful place for novellas online and in digital. I think novellas, particularly if they're serialized, they're a series or whatever, I think can be great. Novellas have a lot of potential, and if you look at a lot of the lengths of books being sold online, novellas, that's why I wrote How to Write a Novella in 24 Hours, because I think novellas are a great format. In this book, I also get into like, the idea of the principles of covers and stuff, and, the design of that stuff. So trying to explain a lot of it about publishing, try to put a lot of stuff in there. So I think there's value for short form books. I think there's a lot of value for like, let me just give you this information here and you can get up and running. I think there's a lot of value in short form stories. Some of the best Stephen King stories were novellas. You look at his book, Different Seasons, which collected 4 stories, and I think like at least 3 of them have been made into movies, and like, some great movies like Stand By Me. So there is a value for that now. There wasn't before, because the only place you could really encounter novella prior to ebooks would be maybe serialized or in one of these, literary magazines, or, one of those sort of bigger magazines that would include that there. But as a standalone property, almost never, unless it was included in an anthology. So that's the world of novellas now. There's an opportunity for that. My email is easy. It's andrew@andrewmain.com. Andrewmain.com. If we could send you work, would you ever read it and give feedback? No pressure. The answer to that is no. And the reason to that is I am so behind in my own stuff. I am so behind in my own work that I have just no time to be able to do that. And I don't know that, it's hard to give constructive or helpful feedback is a very, very special skill. I took writing classes. I took 2 writing classes at a community college, near me where I was living in Florida, because I'd never had somebody other than a friend read my stuff, and I wanted to have a stranger do that. And I recommend that, as you could try something like that. There are also competitions and stuff for writing, but to try to do that, it's a time-consuming thing. It's really, really, really a time-consuming thing, and I wish I could. I wish I could do that, but it's not really a skill set I have either, because I have a pretty good idea what makes a good Andrew Main story, but I don't know, what makes a good you story. And there are lots of stuff that sells really, really well that I am totally incapable of going if this is good or bad or not. And what do I think about a ghostwriter? Have you had one? I would never want to have a ghostwriter write my stuff. I love writing. That's having somebody else have sex for you. That's the way it looks like to me. If you're not good at it, then maybe. To what helped you write novella specifically? I had to use flash fiction like chapters. I think that if I were to make a suggestion, and I have not read what you've written, I would say that you're choosing the wrong subjects if you have to write too compressed. A difference between a novella and a novel, in my opinion, and this is not a firm rule, this is just a observational thing, is you take Game Night. Okay, Game Night is a novella I wrote, okay? Game Night involves one character, one person's point of view. If I wanted to take this premise and put it into a novel, I would have a couple other characters and I would have done that, okay? So I think that what you want to do for novellas is you want to make sure that you are using, your story isn't a novel you're trying to condense. Your story is worth this amount of pages, and that's what it needs, not more, not less. And I think that's one of the problems. I've had people tell me oh, I have this idea for stories and stuff, I have this idea for this thing, and they start telling me this huge, expansive story. I'm like, is this going to be like a series? No, it's the novel. It's going to be a novella. And you just mentioned 10 characters. It takes me 500 words to kind of get you in tone with a character and who they are and what they're doing. If this is a short story, we're 4,000 words into this story, and your story minutes or your story time's up, and I just know who these characters are. I think that's one of the mistakes people make, is they try to tell very ambitious stories in a short thing, when what they need to do is take one element of that. I'll give you an example of how to think about that. You take one of the George R.R. Martin books, Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones novels. That book is probably 6 novellas. I don't mean 6 novellas in length. I mean, if you took each character that appeared in that book and pulled out their chapters and put it into its own book, it would be a novella. And it's really 6 novellas intertwined with the same plot. You could, if you wanted to, tell that same kind of story, but do 6 novellas. And if you're going to have 10 books in the series, it'd be 60 novellas, which might actually be a really cool format to do that. Now, you take Harry Potter. The difference Harry Potter's all about Harry Potter. It's all him. Everything except for the first 30 pages of the first book, Philosopher's Stone, is told from not his point of view, but follows him. It's a third-person point of view that follows only Harry around. Even when we're off with Voldemort and he's in his mansion, conspiring with his evil friends, Harry's seeing this through some means because he's connected psychically to Voldemort. So in a Harry Potter story, they ended up getting 220,000 words long by the end of it. Those were very, very, very big books, and they had a lot of things happening. There were multiple. You could break it down to acts, but there were a lot of acts, a lot of things taking place in there. So, Francis wants to know, for those people starting with my work, what book should you start with? If you're looking for my fiction, I would say Angel Killer, Jessica Blackwood novel. That would be my suggestion, because that's part of a series that goes to Name of the Devil and then to Blackfall. I think you would probably dig those. That's my suggestion. If you're looking just for an idea, a taste of my nonfiction writing, how to write a novella in 24 hours, It's a nice, quick, brisk read, which gives you some of my thoughts on writing. So, thank you for asking. So, I would say that if you can write really good short fiction, which person mentioned before, that's great. Writing short stories and being punctual and to the point is good. I think flash fiction is a wonderful exercise, and flash fiction, if you can write really tight flash fiction stories, you can then think of them as chapters, and you could probably make a really brisk, fast-paced book. I write my books, I will have like super short chapters. Question was, are novels harder than novellas? I'm used to 5,000 words or less. I will check out the novella one. It depends upon, if you choose the right topic, it should be easier. The beautiful thing about a novella is if you've got momentum, you can finish it very, very quickly. Not that that should be your motivation, but I wrote this and, I wrote this as a 25,000 word, 20,000 word novella. I wrote this in 24 hours. I had an idea, sat down in front of my keyboard, and just typed away. Just kept writing and writing. It was fun. It was a total blast. I wrote this right after I'd finished another book, and I was just so excited about, I'd cracked the code for making it easy for me to write, and wanted to sit down and write something right away. Some of my nonfiction books happen, pretty quickly like that. But as far as it being easier, if you choose the right topic, yes, a novella is easier because instead of trying to write, 80,000 words, you're only doing 20,000 words. So, but if you choose the wrong topic, it's harder. If you're choosing something you have to make fit, you have to, work really, really hard to go do that. So, nobody wants me to say define trick. So, a trick would be a new insight into how you think or how you work. And I'll give you an example of a trick for me, like how do I start a chapter? I try to start a chapter with something that makes you think, something that happens that makes you go, what's going next? Let me see if I can find something here. I've got a couple things happen there. So I start off like this chapter where Jessica shows up. She writes, my sense of dread builds as I move towards the center of the protest. It's one thing to see them on the news, but it's something else entirely on the ground, to be on the ground, okay? So what I've set up in my chapter, my little trick there is, I'm going to lead you through this protest or where this is going. I know where this starts, and so I'm going to pull you through this place, and so my chapter starts there. Or it can have more of a hook, like I didn't want to have to use the thing in my pocket, whatever. So Dysphoria wants to know what makes a great hook, something that captures your interest. What captures your interest? And it depends upon, if it's, if I want to have, what they call the meet cute, a girl's going to meet a guy, and I want to have something, when she's going to the restaurant, and the thing is she could be like, this date's going to be fine as long as he doesn't look down, and be like, what happens if he looks down? What's he going to see? And then you could build up to like, she spilled something over her jeans, or her shoes don't match, and then we can set up this sort of comical thing. So that's how you do it in sort of a non-thrillery way. But in a thriller book, it would be, how do I build your interest? How do I set up? A hook is capturing your attention. If I said, hey, it's funny you should mention this, because I have actually on the other side of this slip of paper, I actually have what a hook is. I'm going to show you in a second, but I don't want to show it to you just right now, okay? But I'm going to show you what the hook is in just a second. But first, oh, no, it's blank. I'm sorry. That was a lie. That was a lie. It was a horrible lie. But that was sort of a way to get your interest, is to say, hey, a hook is, there's some unanswered question. There's something about to happen. It's creating tension, and tension that you care about. So that's sort of the simplest way to describe it. For me, one of the things that's worked in trying to figure out like how to move through chapters is I look at a chapter and I say, okay, is this a discovery chapter where my character is going to discover something new? Is it going to be, is it going to be action? Is it going to be conversation? Are they running? Are they going to? Or what's going on here? Where am I building in my little climax chart, and what direction am I going to? And once I have an understanding of that, I figure that out. But, you can mix that up in a chapter. Somebody asked, have I ever written a screenplay? I've written several. I wrote several screenplays before I ever wrote books, and I don't know if they're any good. I think I would probably write a much better screenplay now, but I have done screenplays and done the screenplay format. Is a hook the same thing as a cliffhanger? Raging Girl, a hook would be more of the start, and a cliffhanger would be the end. So the hook could be, let me capture it. It's just sort of where you place it. So a hook could be, I didn't want to have to show what was in my pocket. Desparia wants to know, is there a drawback coming from poetry to novels, going from sonnet prose to so disorienting? I would say that it can be an advantage. I'm not a literature guy. I write commercial books, just page-turner books. If you read my books, you're not going to go like, man, this guy, it's like poetry. It's like the words flow across the page, like sweet, sweet butter. No, that's not me, because I'm not a poet. I don't have that sense of language that people who are really good at poetry have. But I think that great writers, there are a lot of great writers that have a very strong love of poetry and can do that. I would say the disadvantage might be that poets tend to spend a hell of a lot more time obsessing over words as opposed to conflict and story. What do I think about collections of short stories? I think collections of short stories can be great. I think that commercially they're a hard sell, because if you're not a known author, there's not a market for them, and even if you are, there's just not a market. But a short story is a great way to pull people into your writing. I have a project, if you haven't told you about, is called AuthorPage. If you go to authorpage.com, you'll see this. It's a free website for authors. It makes it easy for them to create their own webpage. Free webpage, list your books, whatever. It makes its money when people click through to buy it on Amazon, so it doesn't cost you anything. We make it easy to post short stories there, and we found that when people post short stories and go onto Twitter or email or whatever and tell people, like, hey, check out my short story, you get a lot of click-throughs. People read it and they go, hey, I like your writing. Let me see what else you've done. So I think short stories can be very useful in that medium. Are they harder to sell if they're a shared world? They're just hard to sell, period. It's just a tiny, tiny little market. It's one of these things that it's hard to sort of, draw a circle around it and say this is what they are. So the answer is that I think they're just harder all over. The advantage can be if it's a shared world, if you have a lot of people who are writing and promoting it, maybe, but it's really outside my expertise, as are many things. But back to the early question, though, just about cliffhangers versus hooks. Oh, the website it's authorpage.com, just authorpage.com. The earlier question was asked about cliffhangers versus hooks. So a hook sort of pulls you in. A cliffhanger says, but wait, there's more. So a hook could be, you could put a hook, you might be able to move a hook from the top of one chapter to the end of another chapter and the one preceding it and pull people in. So, a hook would be, I walked into the bar with the gun in my pocket and a photograph in my hand, generic sort of thing. You'd be like, well, it's bad news for whoever the photograph is of, That's just a very basic sort of hook. We've created this tension. There's a gun, which implies somebody's going to get shot. There's a photograph, which implies there's somebody, And at the end of the chapter, we might be, I was about to leave, and then I turned around and I saw the face on the photograph standing at the entrance of the bar. So that's at the end of the chapter. I'm like, well, I got to turn the page now to see what's going to happen. So you don't have to do these things, but I like to do that. I try to remember to put that into my books and to make it flow more. But if you've got a really, really good chapter that just builds up enough mystery in there, don't sweat it if you're not using these things at the beginning and the end. They're really, really good techniques to use, but if you're writing a compelling story, then you should be fine. So just one of the many tools, and that's, it's kind of a commercial fiction method. Knowing what's done, when you're writing, how often do you stop and think, or your writing just flows? I try to make it that I don't have to think in the middle of writing a chapter. I try to think between chapters. So I grab my notebook, sit down, I map out what I'm going to do, I try to answer all the questions I can, and then once I sit down to write, I try to make it so I don't have to stop, unless, I might have to go look up some technical details or something like that. But if you have to stop a lot and interrupt the flow, if you're in the middle of it and you're like, I think I'm going to go make myself some coffee, whatever, then it's much harder to get back into it. So my purpose for my notebooks, is to answer as many of those questions as I can beforehand, so that when I sit down to write, it's pretty automagical and I don't have to get away from what I'm trying to do. I've talked a lot before about making sure that I don't have any interruptions, that when I write, that nothing's distracting me, my notifications are turned off and everything else and that. So I presume you mean to put a question mark there, and the answer is, do I smoke weed? No, never smoked in my life. Never done any drug outside of when I got prescription medication for like dental surgery. It's a choice. I really don't need anything that sits me around, makes me sit around thinking up ways to be more creative. That would not be helpful to me, but everybody else is different. So that's all I have to say on that matter. I do collect pop-up books. I do have quite the collection of pop-up books. Off topic, when you do weird things, do you all see each other on the okay, so I do a show called Weird Things. If you go to weirdthings.com, it's a podcast with Brian Brushwood and Justin Robert Young. And yeah, we see each other we get a Skype feed so we can see each other's faces. So we do the recording for that. So yeah. Question was about longhand. So when I write, I make notes. I don't do a lot of like long form writing like that. I might write the starting point of chapters. If I'm blocked on a chapter or some section, I'll go take my notebook someplace. I'll sit down and I'll be like, okay, what's my hook? What's my way into this to make this really interesting? Okay, Sanos Winston, I just reconnected. Would like to know what questions you are answering in your notebooks. Anything and everything. When I start with a book, pick up a notebook, a brand new notebook for a book, I ask a question. What is this story about? What is the conflict? Who is my character? And then I can just go back and forth answering these questions, and I can just randomly access what I need to do. I might have parts of description of a character on page 2, and I jump ahead to page 30, and I add more details about it. I don't try to, there is this form of writing where we talk about, well, you need your character sheets, and you need this, you need that. And those things are great. Those things can be helpful. Sometimes I'm not ready to think about those things. Sometimes I want to think about other things, and I want to jump back into it. So my notebook just becomes this big collection of ideas about, my books. And it used to be, I threw out, like I had a bunch of notes and stuff here. I guess that was probably for Darker Path and stuff. So I make a bunch of notes. I go back in there, I add in stuff. Sometimes I write stuff in there, but I don't sit there doing like long form writing. And that's nothing wrong with that. I would never be able to read what I wrote. My notebooks are more of just, if you have an idea and you change the medium and you can commit it to something else, it helps you remember it. I don't need to go back to my notebooks all that often. Sometimes I do. If I am writing character descriptions, it helps to do that. But my process is evolving, so is yours. You try different things, find out what works for you and what doesn't. Don't feel bad if you're doing something that's different than what other people do. If it's working, it's okay. But don't be afraid to work on it. Glad you didn't travel here recently to Fort Lauderdale. Only time I'll say, yeah, no, I know. It's my airport. Used to live right near there. Still have a place about 20 miles north of there. But yes, sad times. Anyhow, let's talk about creativity. If you have any questions, do you doodle? Do you draw a picture notebook? I do. Not very well, but I do. I'll do that sometimes, even if I'm writing, a book like Blackfall. I'll like diagram like a building or something, like things need to happen. I'll go in there and like sketch it out. It will never appear there, but I'll do that. When you have to consider genre, do you have to have a perfect fit? It depends if you're writing. The things that sort of determine genres, there are two things. One is publishers, what they're buying. The other is what fits into an Amazon category. Everything else is sort of secondary. So, you can go drill down into Amazon and see what there's a steampunk category. There's a steampunk genre there. But if you want to write a werewolf steampunk book, do it. Do it. And that's often what changes things up, is people who kind of create sort of a new genre or expand upon it. The Harry Potter books were interesting because we weren't getting, by the middle of that franchise, these books were 150, 200,000 words long, which were huge. And nobody was writing books that long for kids. There wasn't a market for that, but there became one. It evolved into that. It became sort of its own genre of these really sort of longer form books. You know, the Twilight books, teen paranormal romance, okay? You know, teen paranormal romance, you know, is its own thing. SS there, hello there to Boulder. Boulder's a nice town. You know, these were sort of things, you know, so a cyberpunk magical realism, for example. I think, you know, if you feel passionate about it and you want to write it, okay? You know, I think that, don't be afraid to sort of, you know, just write it and then figure out where it fits elsewhere. And I wrote stuff like my first book I wrote was a hunter on an alien planet that was sort of this planet that everything was sort of a steampunk level of technology with alien cryptozoology, and it was sort of this alien steampunk sort of story. But I knew steampunk people weren't going to really be all over it, but people who like just good hard science fiction did. So, you know, write it and figure out where it fits best. So, I believe it was Caitlin mentioned the little sand garden thing she got at the Murakami Museum. My friend had one of those, but never needed one. Never looked like a kitty litter box to me. Wasn't my thing. The Murakami Museum is really beautiful though. Went there for the Bond Festival. Really neat place. It's a place in Florida where it's this Japanese gardens and museum, and neat. And like you expect ninjas to pop out of the middle of nowhere. So I'm gonna stick around as long as you all have questions, and I'm waiting for a project to render. So. At 27%, and one of the things that I try to do is one of Andrew's keys to short-term productivity is the way I multitask. So I have a right back, folks. I have a new Magic project coming out, which is this sort of interactive board game where it's sort of like the outcomes predicted. You put the cards in the middle and the players make their choices, and then it says, aha, I knew you were going to do this. It's like pretty much self-working. But I still needed to have a video explaining how to present it. So I've been putting together, I have a video editing or being rendered right now for that. So I thought, you know, why wait for this to render? I could go watch a movie, or I could just come here and talk to you guys. So yes, stacking functions, absolutely. It's one of the things that I'll do is, like, if I'm working on, when I was putting together like magic effects or doing things like that, after I finished working on the magic effect and I was editing, if I was getting really bored of editing, I would hop into Photoshop and work on the cover. And then I would open up a document, I'd start working on the campaign. And that's the thing, if you're writing a book or a song or something you want to promote, don't wait till you're exhausted and over it to start working on your marketing and how you're going to promote it, because you're going to put the least amount of energy into that, and that's kind of where it needs the most amount of energy. I mean, it needs to be great, but if you don't have the energy to tell people that it's good, then nobody will ever know. And if you have this level of energy telling people about it, if you expect people to repeat it or tell somebody else, that energy level keeps dropping. So I try to, you know, I don't try to jump around. I mean, if I have to move to another task to keep my brain active, I'd move to another task relating to the project that will help the project get completed, not some new project. So I've had this project in the middle of working on that. I'll put that together. When are you releasing the video? I'm going to release the effect, I think, try to get it out Tuesday. Latest book you walked away amazed from. I'm going to have to think about that. I mentioned Joodles. Do drawings ever influence stories? I don't think I'm good enough of an artist to have that work. You mentioned Dune before. You watched the film. Do you think it was true to the book? I would say that the heart of the Paul Atreides character was pretty true to the book. The book is a huge book, and trying to fit it into a 2-hour film. And I've seen the extended versions and even like the huge extended one of the oil paintings and stuff. It's a challenge. The most faithful adaptation was actually the Sci-Fi Channel movie. They did the first book, and then they did the second 2 books condensed into one miniseries. You know, if you treat it like a play, the special effects are kind of cheap and sometimes non-existent and stuff. Or you watch them be in front of a background that was like a painting, but like the shadows went one way and their shadows went another. But as a actual screenplay script, I thought that was really well done. There is a new version being put together in the works by Denis Villeneuve, who is the guy who did Arrival, Sicario, who's doing the new Blade Runner movie. So could be fantastic. He's an amazing talent. So, you know, I'll give him a chance. I love Dune. I enjoyed the movie. You know, I enjoy the movie a lot. I mean, it's flawed. It's a very flawed movie, but I thought that David Lynch did a lot of really clever, you know, beautiful things there. It does feel sort of, you know, otherworldly. So I appreciate that. What's the other thing you were working on? We mentioned the lighting next to you. That I'm working on. That was actually the instructional video for Clueless. That's the instructional video for that. I wanted to put in a DVD to explain how it works. This is like a 15-minute DVD, so I needed to shoot that. So I just put together sort of a half-assed sort of lighting setup and all that there. So it's a pain in the butt going through that, but you know, I wanted to make sure that people could clearly understand what I'm trying to do. And that's, you know, I have this sort of theory. It's that thing you're hesitating to do, unless it's like, you know, criminal. Just do it. Just bite the bullet and get it done. You spend more time stressing out about something. It's like, do I want to do a video? Do I want to do this? Like, I can get it done. Do I ever write things that can fit together even with outlining? Write things to fit together accidentally, even with outlining. I have had just ideas that from one story that made its way into another. I've had ideas that I write down in one story. I'm like, man, this would be a really cool angle for this. And so it found its way somewhere else. And I have ideas that start in sort of one form. Like this effect actually came from, I was working on an idea for like an interactive magic book. And I had an idea that was a little bit too complicated for that, but I thought would make for a really cool magic effect. And so that started as, hey, you know what'd be cool? And then I had enough, I'm looking like, no, this doesn't fit here, but this would be cool. So somebody wanted to know where you'd be able to buy it. It'll be available on my magic shop at andrewmain.com. And if you're on my email list, which I need to have like a card to hold up, like, you know, go to andrewmain.com and sign up to get my email list. I'll send out an email, you know, at least one on Tuesday or so, and then a few more out there. So I'll put that there. So where can we buy that? The magic thing? Yeah, the magic thing, it'll just be through like my, you know, through my email list on my website, probably eventually magic shops, but that won't be on Amazon. The only thing that I put on Amazon, I mean, there's like my regular books, of course, are there, but my only things you can get of my stuff there is generally anything that's print that can be print on demand. So just to give you an idea on like how this works, I have a when I write a book like this and I use Amazon's CreateSpace program. So CreateSpace lets you publish books for free. You upload your book, you put up your cover, you figure out, you know, let them use their ISBN and all that. They have a file, and then what happens if somebody orders the book through Amazon, or Amazon has their own, like they own CreateSpace, but their own services that do it, is this book gets printed one-off and shipped to the person directly from the printers. So I don't have to keep inventory. And so when you click order, that book does not, this copy of the book probably does not exist unless it's a book that's been getting a lot of, you know, orders for that. And then it gets pulled out of the ether, put in a print, and sent off to you. I love that. I love that. I did that with this magic book. Magic and Mischief is a magic book I wrote last year. Actually, now it'd be, does that count as 2 years ago? Yeah, this is now technically 2015. This was in 2015. So this was a book I wrote that was just sort of a bunch of fun magic, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, it was easy to do. Instead of having to do a big print run of a magic book, I could just go in there, and I found out I could do, you know, a square-sized book, whatever. What an idiot. And do that. Is there a maximum page count for that? I'm sure if you go to createspace.com, you can check it out and see there. And that's Amazon's program. There's also Ingrid Spark. So Tiffany wants to know, how does the profit margin work on there? You'd have to go to CreateSpace and see. You put in like the page count on there, but it's not bad at all. I mean, I make more with that through myself than if I went through a publisher. You know, I probably make, you know, 50% of the retail price or more. So it's not bad at all. I don't have to keep inventory. You know, I still sell like magic downloads from my andrewmain.com site for video downloads and stuff. But other than that, like, you know, I don't keep inventory, you know, I'm just, you know, it's not worth the time, because I'm lazy, but, you know. Do you prefer ebooks or hard copies? Would you get both? For me, I prefer hard copies. I prefer either audiobooks or hard copies. I just ordered, Robert Cialdini wrote a book called Persuasion. which is, he wrote a wonderful book about influence, and so this book, Persuasion, sounds fantastic. So I bought that in paperback or hard copy because I'll probably put post-it notes in there and I want to annotate it and mark it up. Sometimes if it's just a short story or whatever, I'll do an ebook or Audible. I listen to a lot of Audible books, but I'm still a print person. I don't think print's going to ever go. I don't think print's going to go away. It'll become a smaller market, and it'll become more on demand. But I love it. So I may have missed a question somebody asked, and then feel free to ask me again, and I will try to answer it. So I wish it could just track the questions through here, but it doesn't. Andrew, do you have a good technique for taming too much creativity at once, too many directions? Yes. I'm going to explain to you two things. It's Selena, I believe, okay? Number one, here's your problem as a creative person. This is everybody listening. This is a problem we all have. We're creative partially because we want to change the world. We want to change the world around us. We want to change the environment. We want to imagine things differently, and so we're creative. We use our creativity whenever we get into a problem. We try to find a creative solution towards things. We like novelty. Dopamine is this chemical trigger. It's a neural pathway in our brain that gets triggered to reward. It's how we reward ourselves. This is a process that came about hundreds of millions of years ago, and it's evolved into a thing where we can get rewarded through abstract. It used to just be like, I'm eating food, I feel good, dopamine. Now we can get rewarded as Homo sapiens. We're probably one of the few species that even can work on an abstract level. Certain thoughts make us happy. Certain actions make us happy that don't really have any physical consequences. When it comes to creativity and trying to stay on track, one of the reasons that we stop a project is we're not getting as much dopamine, that we're not getting those little firing, we're not getting the little trigger, we're not getting a reward function of our brain rewarded when we're doing something. When we first start off and it's novel and it's new and it's exciting, and the abstract level of our brain that's rewarded by dopamine has a lot of things to make it excited, it's great. But then after a while that starts to dull and we're not getting that sort of feedback. What you have to do is, one, figure out what will make you excited. What will do that? And for me, one of the things it can be is that I have to sort of, I'm going to use a chapter. If I have to write a chapter, but I'm a little bit bored, I step to the side and I look at it from a different angle. And I'm like, what would be the most exciting way that either thing that could happen in the story? Or what if I went and I wrote this in some different environment and I changed this? What if I had to sit down and write this chapter using a pencil and a piece of paper? What if I had to do this in some other challenging sort of way? What if I had to do this in a different way? Put on these challenges on me in the way that I'm going to do it, or put some sort of creative challenge into it where I had to do it and try to figure something out. Like, what's the most exciting way I can make this thing happen? What's the most horrible thing I can make happen to my character? So I come up with a creative challenge, and this applies to other things. But back to where I started about the problem with your creative is anytime you encounter a challenge, anytime you encounter a problem, you are very good at coming up with reasons for how you as a creative person don't need to do it. You can invent excuses not to do it. You're in the middle of a project, you're starting a project, maybe you're 20% in, and you're at that point where your dopamine isn't getting triggered, you're not as excited, you're not getting the little rewards, and you want those rewards, and thinking about that other project makes you excited. Thinking about that other project sends that little bit of a, ooh, this is cool. You're going to be pulled towards that because that's how we have been evolved through millions of years of evolution. We want to go towards a thing that's going to make the dopamine fire. But this is the same reason why, junkies overdose, is they're trying to overdo it. You have to figure out another way to get that trigger. And one of the things you need to do is, one, is acknowledge the reason you're being distracted is you're using your creativity to give you a reason to go do something else. Your creativity is giving you this reason to go, maybe I'll go do this instead. Maybe that sounds like a great idea. This is a brilliant idea. And as a creative, you can talk yourself into anything. You need to say, shut up, I need to focus. That's part of it, and to understand why that's happening. The second thing you need to do is, after you acknowledge the fact that you're using your creativity to get yourself out of a situation that you should not be out of, that you should be sticking to, is to then use your creativity to approach that problem from a different angle. How do you make it interesting? How do you do that? And sometimes the problem is two things. One of two things. Either we realize we don't have a plan, we're off the plan, and we're in one of those spaces between step one and step two, and that step that should go in the middle there, we don't know the answer to, and we need a solution to.
Or we have an enthusiasm problem, which ties back to the dopamine. Either well, I can't get to the next step of the plan and get that little trigger because I finished my chapter and all of a sudden I feel rewarded, or I'm not excited to go do it. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between when our plan has gaps or we're going through an enthusiasm problem. Those problems can look the same and feel, one can feel like the other, when in fact you need to sort of drill down and look at it. When notebooks come out, I pull out my notebook and I ask myself, like, what happens next? Do I know what happens next? What's interesting about happens next? Not just how I would describe what happened, but what's the conflict? What's the next conflict? What needs to be resolved? If it's a business, if it's sitting down to finish a business and you realize you got to do a bunch of mundane stuff, you need to just drill down and get into what's going to be interesting about it and find the thing that's, we talk about gamification. There's certainly some value to that, but you need to figure out what's going to make you, enthusiastic to solve these problems. And sometimes it can't. Sometimes you just got to sit down and do it. And if it's not creative, then just do the work. Do you curate works of fiction through outlining stage, see if you want to finish them next? I will take things through outline. I will see how far I get into an outline to see if I want to go next. And it's a very good question. It's a very good thing to bring up. Is sometimes we're very excited about some part of something, but we don't know where to go with it, or we might run out of steam. So I make sure that I have a very clear beginning, middle, and end. I may not have a super detailed outline, but I'm like, this is the start, this is the premise, this is the conflict, and this is the resolution. I try to make sure that I understand that, and I know there's enough complications along the way. When you write a book, do you usually write in chronological order? Yes, especially my book, The Chronological Man, which you can check out on Amazon, by the way. I wrote 2 of them. But yeah, I do write in chronological order. You don't have to. For me, I write in a very sequential order. There's some schools of thought that say maybe you should write your book from the beginning or from the middle out, or other schools of thought write your book from the backwards to the front. The problem I have with writing a book backwards is that after I do some good world building and character building, I tend to have a much better resolution than I had before. I had that happen just, a week ago with a book I finished where I had an ending, and then I looked at that ending for my character, and I'm like, yeah, it's good, but I'm like, that's not the most exciting ending. It's a believable ending, but it wasn't the most exciting or interesting ending. And then I thought of a complication of, what if he got put into a jail overnight for this because of this reason? And I thought, what if somebody wants to kill him? And I'm like, oh, wow, I set something up in the very first part of the book I totally forgot about, which is a great way for him to extricate himself from the situation. And had I stuck to my outline, I wouldn't have had that, and I wouldn't have gotten to the other part of the book, which got cool. But I did have an outline. I had a place to finish, and that's the beautiful thing about a plan is what you refer to when you forget to where to go. We use blueprints, we use directions and maps just so we know that we have a place to go to. But by the time we get there, maybe we'll find something more interesting along the way. Sporty says that's why I like writing endings first to see, to make sure you have a place to go to. Make sure that you know where you want to go. If we're going on a trip and we go to the airport and we're going to go to Cleveland to go look at the the Potato Festival, great. But if we're at the airport and Richard Branson says, "Do you want to hop on my jet and go to my island and hang out with what?" Turns out Elvis is still alive and he's there. I think we're going to go do that, So you want to be open to new opportunities. My problem is when I write one ending, it later ends up in the middle. So it sounds like a pacing thing. And are your books showing or are they telling? Are you showing or telling? And the difference between showing and telling, for those of you kind of new to that idea, is that a book that tells is like, well, so-and-so did this, and then they did this, and then they did that. And you can tell a book in 2 sentences that way. You can tell a book in 1 sentence. If you're showing, then we're actively experiencing the story, and you're going to find out that you're going to, it'll be going to be hard to get to that ending because you're going to realize there are all these complications that come into play the more realistic your world is. So I would ask myself that question, am I showing too much, or am I telling too much? Do I need to show more? And, the difference is that showing is where you want to be, in my opinion, and showing feels like you're there in the scene with the characters, is that you're in the moment. And the author voice isn't jumping in and telling you what happens, is we're experiencing what happens. You've been compared to William Gibson. William Gibson circa 1982, or William Gibson circa, 2012. So, Yeah, one of the first stories I ever wrote was inspired by a William Gibson story, a short story, and was very liked it. But I realized like I kind of just was trying to summarize it. Oh, Tiffany, what's up? The other day you mentioned thinking about writing on how-to books. Can you elaborate? Okay, Tiffany. Yeah, I was thinking about writing, maybe a book on motivation for creative people, kind of getting more into when I talk about my little tips or tricks or things like that, getting a little bit more into sort of the science and how these things work in a process for how to get yourself motivated to finish something, how to, when the little dopamine triggers aren't working, how to keep going. So I was thinking about writing a book on that. So I was going to do that. Yes, Batman, of course, obviously. Oh my gosh, Noni says, gotta get tacos for me. I know. Do they even have tacos in your part of the world? I'm just curious. I don't know. Was that wrong? Just asking. Thank you for tuning in this long. Noni, for those of you who know, I think she's in England, which is like a long ways away. So yeah, we'll see. I think that book might be one of the next ones. I want to put together more books for creative people on stuff that would be very, just sort of like Cure for Writer's Block, right? How to write a novella, and try to make these sort of, hey, this is just what you need to know. Let me condense this down for you and help you work your way through it. So might be doing more things like that. They're fun to write. It really helps me a lot. So helps me understand that. Folks, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm still waiting for a render. I'm at 36%, so you have my undivided attention for a considerable amount of time here. And my white balance is a little bit off, but everybody will just have to make do. So anyhow, not distracted, not at all. I'm fully here. I'm present. I'm here for you. We're here for each other. And I'm going to have some Diet Coke. Raging Girl wants to know, what am I rendering? I am rendering a, it's the video to explain the magic effect for Clueless. I want to put in a little DVD that explains like the presentation of it. So I shot it on my iPhone, and then I noticed the low light's great, but there was a lot of graininess in there, so I found a great filter that actually takes the grain and gets rid of it, but it has to then render it because I was too lazy to light it right. So everybody suffers. So I've heard of the book Steal Like an Artist. I have not read the book, but I'm gonna, interesting little thing is like I had this conversation before with a friend about they will talk about, well, all this thing is they use this element from here or this from here, and I'm like, well, that's not. There's a difference between just copying something wholesale and pasting it into a work versus taking an influence and then transforming it. And that's what copyright law is, the idea of based upon something can be stealing or something can be transformative. You take some element, it's transformative. Darth Vader, his costume looks in some ways like a samurai, but he is not it's not a samurai costume. It's transformative. It took the idea of a samurai, transformed it. So when you look at it, you're not immediately thinking this is a guy in a samurai costume, but then you can understand where it came from, though. I think that it's important to understand sort of the differences for that. I wrote in my Grindel's Shadow, I had this character that was kind of a Clint Eastwood-esque character, but I didn't take a character out of a Clint Eastwood movie and put him into there. I just sort of said, let me take a character that's kind of like him and change him and adapt him a little bit, and it will be different. And I think that's one of the things that get lost on a lot of people is they think that, yes, his helmet did look like it could look like something else. People get sort of hung up on, I think people who don't create as much, who don't do a lot of original creative stuff, don't see the difference. I think that's one of the things is they don't realize when something's transformative. They just think, well, it's just like that. But like, well, as a creator, I can see where that's transformative. A great example in some context would be, you take, in artists, okay, you take Andy Warhol, okay, Andy Warhol and his Campbell's soup, stuff. It's like, well, it's just a Campbell's soup label. Well, the context that he's done is he took a Campbell's soup label and he took this iconography of marketing and mass consumerism and said, well, I'm going to sell it back to you as art. And so there's this sort of transformative thing that takes place there is sort of how that works. And there can be gray areas. Some people have tried to do that kind of just almost quite literally taking works of other artists and doing that. And it's like, well, we're a little bit step away from the context there, you know. Frasby says that's the essence of the book. We take and make it our own. Ideally, yeah. And I think, yeah, that's the point of like, that's when, you know, Steve Jobs talked about like, you know, great artists steal, paraphrasing Picasso. And the point is great artists steal and then, you know, they transform. Ideally, some people just steal, some people just copy things, and that's it. Is they think, well, other artists do this, I copy this, why? But there's not enough, that whatever they used to transform it didn't add enough value to it, and that's one of the problems. Is it can be like, well, like, yeah, I wrote a book about a bunch of kids in this British school who, you know, are upper England school who do magic and stuff, and you know, his name's Harry and all this. You know, and it's like, yeah, you just wrote a crappier version of Harry Potter. How did you transform it? You had a different plot, but was it really good? You know, and that's debatable. You know, it's debatable. So, yes, now we're getting into crazy questions here. Was it Magritte, whatever, who was with the pipe? Anyhow, you get into sort of, you know, these different sort of aspects, and art becomes its own thing where you have art and then several steps removed from it. Tiffany wants to know what are you doing on Periscope on tonight? I'm using the same iPad I used before, but I put it in a landscape mode. I realized that I can do that. I don't think you could do that in Periscope before, but I put it in a landscape mode because, you know, I was thinking maybe I'd upload it to YouTube, which I haven't done before, but I didn't want to do that, you know, with this. So there was a question about, I got another pot question. Never smoked it. Don't eat it. I don't do it. Whatever you want to do, your choice. Fine. The least interesting question I could probably answer. So ask an almost straight edge guy about that. I didn't taste alcohol to like a couple. Actually, I tasted beer when I was like a teenager. Didn't like it, and I waited like a long time before I ever had any again. It's not a drinker. I'm not really a drinker. Can't even tell you the last time I had a drink. But again, everybody else's mileage may vary. You know, for me, an exciting time is to sit in a Denny's with a notebook and writing ideas. So I wouldn't call myself a lifestyle model for anybody else. You know, I wouldn't recommend that. I'm an odd, weird guy. I know this and I accept this. So I won't judge you. Theater Magic wants to know, what was your first book? My first book ever, which was a nonfiction book, was my book Solo X, which was a book on magic, on stage magic, illusions that a solo performer could do. I did all the artwork in MS Paint, so you can imagine how fantastic that was. And my first like non-magic book was I wrote a book on filmmaking, and then my first real novel was Public Enemy Zero, which I don't have a copy here. What was the last book I read? Well, I'm in the middle of reading Collected Stories of Arthur C. Clarke, so I'm in the middle of reading that right now and loving it. Almost at the end of it, and I'm making me sad, but it's a wonderful collection of his short stories. I think I missed 2 questions that came through here, so guys, if I don't answer your question, please ask it again. I'm not going to, unless it's something really, really dumb, I'm not going to ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. The books behind me, by the way, those are Star Wars pop-up books. Those are incredible. Yeah. Yeah, space elevators, Selena, they're a fun idea for fiction, but they're not a good idea. Rapidly reusable rockets, that's the answer. It ends up being cheaper and better, my opinion. But yeah, that's how we started our whole Weird Things podcast, was debates about that. If you could be roommates with any living author dead for a year, who would you pick? I don't know. Like, I haven't had like a roommate in forever. I would probably live in my car before I'd have a roommate. So, you know, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I've like hung out with my buddy, you know, Peter at his house, you know, stayed in his basement when I visited there, so that's kind of fun. But for a year, geez, I wouldn't wish me on anybody. Theater Magic wants to know, are you working on a book now? I am working on Santa List. I will do that in a second. Just remind me. Book-wise, I just turned in the second book for a series that'll be coming out from Thomas and Mercer in September. And then I'm finishing up a new Magic Effect, Clueless, which I should be releasing next week. But another book, maybe. Got a book idea in the back burner that I want to do before the big release for Blackfall, which Publishers Weekly called an enthralling, twisty, clever treat. So
question was, I think Santalis wanted to know, could you see one of the things from the pop-up book? Absolutely. These books are fantastic. This is by Matthew Reinhardt, who's one of my favorite pop-up books, my favorite of all time. You get amazing things like this, and Reinhardt will do stuff like, look at this, he's attacking you. This is like, it's coming right out of the page. Really, really awesome. There's like the Mos Eisley Cantina, and then this is really cool. Get ready, get ready. Watch this. So, one of his many excellent books. The other one's got some incredible pop-ups there too. The most recent one that I have by him is the Lego pop-up book. I'm going to show you. This is going to blow your mind here. Look at that. That's like some Harry Potter magic, folks. That is just insane. Look at that. It's just, what the hell? So, one of the many delights in my collection. And I like, when I need to solve a problem, I like to take my brain out of one mode, and I like to put it in like a kinesthetic mode or play with something tactile. So like, I love pop-up books because they're books, but they pop up out of there. I keep next to my desk here. I keep next to me here at like workspace. I'll have a, you know, a deck of cards. So if I'm getting bored or whatever and I need to work on something, I can just, you know, play with cards and stuff and do that. So I try not to do anything distracting that can be more distracting than the thing I'm trying to do. You want to be very careful about that. You don't want to pull yourself away from what you're doing to the point that you never want to go back. Very important, you know. Do you ever merge multiple shorter books? I've never merged books together like that. I've never done that because I kind of move from one book to the next to the next. I mean, I'll take ideas and stuff. If you read the Jessica Blackwood books, you know, there's a backstory told in her about her childhood, and so you could certainly say there is another story in there about that takes place as we're in present tense. So I do in that context, but, you know, I just, you know, if something works, it works. If it doesn't work, I just kind of put it aside, you know. I don't get too attached to anything. I just sort of I like to keep moving forward. I think it's important to just sort of keep going. Are you throwing cards that people disrupt you? Not yet, but it could happen. I think that, you know, you want to, you know, figure out your state of flow and keep in your state of flow. Caitlin says, running to Taco Bell right now, real quick. One thing. Oh my God, see if you can't get like the sweet and sour double taco or whatever that is. Try that. They're out of them where I am. Disappointing. It's frustrating. And I use the Taco Bell app because I like to custom design my meals there. But I try not to eat there very often. The world's biggest Steve Harvey fan wants to know, what is the last movie I saw? Well, last night I watched Eastern Promises again on HBO Go. Eastern Promises is a David Cronenberg movie starring Naomi Watts and Viggo Mortensen about the Russian mafia in England. Great movie. I saw it when it first came out, saw it again, really, really enjoyed it, thought it was really good, and so that was the last one I saw. Last movie I saw in theaters was Rogue One. Yeah, Golden Globes is tonight. Man, I am like so out of like, you know, that world of like what's going on. Everybody here, everybody relax. Theater Magic, I clicked on your profile because Artilio, are you the guy the magician who did cruise ships and stuff? Because I filled in for you once, like a billion years ago on a ship once. I think I did a fly-in date. I was like 9 years old. So you may have been 11. So small world, funny world. When you're using the Taco Bell app, does that mean you have to pay it on the app only? Yeah, you just use your credit card, you know, or you can use a Taco Bell gift card on there. But yeah, the app allows you to customize things, you know, exactly to your, you know, however you like it. I like how every conversation I get into somehow gravitates towards Taco Bell. You're a vegan. Oh, listen, if it makes you happy, I'm not going to judge. I prefer to, you know, eat higher life forms because they're tasty.
Frisbee wants to know, have you seen Arrival? Please talk about it, how it's one of the best movies ever. Arrival's fantastic. I'm talking about earlier about Denis Villeneuve, who is the director of Arrival. Before that, he did Sicario, which is fantastic. He's an amazing director, and up next he's doing Blade Runner and maybe Dune. So it's a beautiful movie, and what I'll tell you, a great thing about Arrival is that Arrival, if you want to watch, you can see movies that are very pretty movies, but the shots and why they're pretty have nothing to really do to help the story. And that can be the case in writing too, is you can have a beautiful sentence, a beautiful description, but it doesn't serve the story. And that doesn't mean that it's a great book. It may look like, you might be like, maybe this is a great book because this is so beautiful. And so a movie can have a beautiful shot, but if it doesn't tell the story, and I see that a lot with like indie films. I had some friends that invested in a film and they had me watch it, and I watched part of it, and I'm like, oh, isn't this beautiful? I'm like, yeah, it's a beautiful shot. It's like a postcard. It has absolutely nothing to do with the story. It's like your DP and your director were making two different movies. One of them was just making a reel of pretty things. The other one's trying to tell a story, but they didn't get together. Where Arrival is wonderful. Denis Villeneuve's shot composition tells the story, conveys isolation, everything else you need to do. If you're holding a book, do you often feel the need to finish a chapter before you close it? Yes. I do. It depends. If it's good, if it's not a good one, then I will, not feel a need to finish it. I'm not afraid to give up a book if I'm not pulled into it. I've been reading a lot of like middle grade books and stuff like that, and I ran into something that was like boring. I'm like, I don't think kids would read. I don't think kids would like choose this on their own. If a grown up made them read it, I think that's what happened. They would read it. But I'm like, I'm bored, and if I'm bored in like a book that is meant to capture the attention of a 10-year-old, then we got a problem here. So, then again, I could be jaded. If I read Pat Conroy, I can't off the hand think of anything I may have read by Pat Conroy, but it is entirely possible. Not that I went through periods where I'd read like a book every couple days and stuff, and so that sort of all blurs together. I remember reading like in high school, I read like a Canticle for Leibowitz, and what is the word? What am I looking for? To Kill a Mockingbird at the same time. And like, I remember this very weird post-apocalyptic book about a trial and racism and stuff. And so kind of a, not a really good, affirmation of how good my brain works in remembering stuff. But yeah. Everybody, it is 8 o'clock here, still early. I'll stick around here and said that. What's a good genre and stuff for middle grade? Now, there's lower middle grade and there's upper middle grade. And so you want to sort of break that down and understand, like, who are you talking about? 8-year-olds? You're talking about 12-year-olds, and what's appropriate for which group? And one early lower middle grade, exciting is like, hey, we get the house to ourselves. It's cool. Upper middle grade is like, our parents are dead and now we're on our own. Yeah. So. Theater Magic was at 8 p.m. Where are you on the West Coast? I am in Burbank right now. So I'm in actually rainy Burbank, usually sunny Burbank, but I'm in beautiful Burbank at the moment. But I still have a place in South Florida though, near Pompano Beach, Coconut Creek. So, but most of the time out here. But enough about me. If you guys have any more questions, please feel free. I will keep rambling on and on because it's what I do. Never read A Child Called It. I'm familiar with the book, but no. You're going to be disappointed about how few great books and really important literature I've actually read, and it's a deficit that I need to rectify. Yeah, better than snowy New Jersey. No, I agree. I will take this weather any day over where it's like freezing cold. I don't like the cold. I don't like snow. Frosby, thank you very much for tuning in. Glad you could be here, okay? I pop into Periscope frequently and talk about these sorts of things. So I am going to, if there are any last minute questions, I'll go to answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to tune out here, guys, and go open up Photoshop and start putting together a cover for a project and get going on that. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. I really appreciate your questions.
Um, what does genre versus literary debate still exist in reading circuits? I think that the debate, so the different like debate, you know, I think that when people get really bored with regular books, they then want to discuss something else. So that. Are you on TV? I'm not on TV at the moment. I mean, right? I mean, maybe somewhere in the world I'm probably on TV, but you know, like right now, just on Periscope. But yes, if you Google me, you might find out. Do books people read determine a lot about them? It certainly means like where they're gravitated towards. I think that if you look at my bookshelf, look at your bookshelf, we might learn a lot about each other. So, um, you know, I think that can make a difference as far as like understanding who we are. But I think that getting exposed to things makes a difference. I am not in a band. I have no musical skill whatsoever. I had to learn fake magic skill. That's what I had to do, and then do pretend to be able to work miracles um, instead of having real skills like that. So I am going to go. I think, did I miss a question? I'll stick around if there's another question comes in, but I don't want to try everybody's patience here while this renderer is checking my patience. Yeah, if you're drawn to magical realism, that's who you are. For sure. I'm not a magical realism person. That's not my tendency. I can appreciate. I've read some stories, that are really good, but I like to have a grounded reality, like knowing that any moment some magical absurdist thing can happen. I'd be like, this is really not for me. So, all right, folks, you all have a great evening, and let's get together real soon. Talk again.